All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in wherever you may be listening from across the Aloha State. Today on the Hawaii Retirement Show, we're super stoked. We got a guest speaker with us. We have Travis Agustin of Agustin Hawaii Law. Travis is an estate planning attorney here in Hawaii, and we're real excited for this episode. Real quick, Paul, how you feeling? How you doing?
Yeah, feeling good. Really excited. This is also gonna be our first episode that we're gonna have available via video on
That's
Zoom,
right.
through YouTube. So yeah, excited for that as well.
Yeah, we've been putting those still frames up there, but
Yep.
yeah, now you can actually put a face to the voice. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
we're progressing. Anyway, yeah, so super excited. We're going to kind of go over some common estate planning documents and kind of high level stuff, but really key stuff to a financial plan and just in estate planning in general. And so Travis, thank you again for joining us, and I'll kick it over to you for if you want to introduce yourself to our listeners a little bit about who you are and kind of what you do.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Paul and Jason, for having me on your show. So born and raised here in Hawaii. I went to school out in Pearl City, went to Waiau Elementary, Highlands Intermediate, graduated from Iolani School. I spent some time on the mainland getting educated, came back home, met my wife, and the rest of the story's done from there, right? But I started practicing here in Hawaii back in 2010. So it's been about 13 years since I've been practicing here in Hawaii. I practiced at a large law firm in Honolulu in their estate planning group. Gained a lot of experience, and just last year launched my own practice. To deliver something a little bit different, a little bit personal, more authentic. For the people in Hawaii, and so that's part of my passion is working with families, especially local families, to help navigate what's often, sometimes a difficult conversation to have in estate planning. On the personal side of things, I'm married for 12 years. We have three daughters, two twins that were born at the beginning of the year. So I've been super busy, and also thinking about my own estate plan and things that change in your life. And so yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Awesome. All right, so I guess we'll yeah, thanks again for being here, and I guess we'll jump right in. Paul, do you want to kick us off on
Yeah.
some estate planning basics here? Get into the documents.
Yeah, that's so good. No, I mean, Travis, moving from 1 to 3, that's a big step. That's awesome. That's
Huge,
awesome.
man.
Hey, girl dad too. That's
For
awesome.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, thanks again. And super excited to have my friend Travis here and just share his knowledge. And yeah, so really, we're going to just jump into some basics. So Travis, just thinking about like those common estate planning documents, um, why don't you just kind of, we'll dig into like a will, what that looks like. And maybe if you could share some like thoughts on who might need it, what it might look like. And again, we're going to differentiate between all these other things like a trust, advanced health care directives, and power of attorneys, and all those things that'll be talked about. But let's just kick it off with a will, right? I think that's a good place to start.
Sure. Yeah. So, one of the first things people commonly associate with an estate plan is a will. And so the question becomes, what is a will? What does it do? What can it do for me? And so basically, a will is basically a document that sets forth who's going to administer your estate when you pass and how you want your estate to be divided, and who gets what and how much. And that's a document that gets submitted to the court to appoint one who's going to be your personal representative of your estate, who will handle all of your affairs. And that's an important decision to make in terms of who is going to be that person, that key person, to kind of carry out your wishes. And so that's kind of the basic document that gets submitted to the probate court, have to go through the probate process. And I can talk about, a little bit about that. Some people fear that process. Some people think it's not so bad, but I can kind of give you a little bit more information about that. But the will is just a basic document of who's going to handle your estate and then how you're going to have it divided. Is kind of the basic nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, I think, for me, maybe this is a good time, just to kind of talk a little bit about probate, and maybe just thinking about like, if you don't have a will too, like what are some of those consequences of like, what probate process might look like?
Sure. Yeah. So, when you can do advanced planning, you put together a will, kind of setting forth how your estate's going to go. But if you don't do any planning, so say you say, I'm going to just let it ride and, not do any planning, there could have some unintended consequences. You're going to have, resort back to the default statutory rules in terms of distributing your estate. And that may not be what you wanted. And so that can cause some, angst and heartache, because some things may have been said informally that weren't memorialized. And if we resort to the default rules, it may cause division, it may cause misunderstandings amongst the family. And so that's kind of one of the goals of creating any type of estate plan, is to try to avoid those kind of train wrecks that you could kind of see and anticipate coming. And so, and the intestacy rules basically provide for, if you don't have a will, it's going to go to your next of kin. So if you're married, it'll go to your surviving spouse. If you have children, if you don't have a surviving spouse, it could go to your children. If you don't have any one of those categories, then it'll start to go to further and further descendants, parents, siblings, it might be even cousins. Right. And cousins you may not even talk to, ever, or even years. And so those are sometimes, the situations where it really grieves my heart that, hey, this person didn't want their assets to go this way. A cousin gets a notice in the mail that, hey, your cousin passed away and you're entitled to a piece of their estate, and they're totally surprised, but everyone understands that maybe might not have been what that person wanted. So it's always a, good idea to start a plan.
Absolutely.
And then with that, so even if it does end up going to, the people they desired, it's a longer process. It could be costly, right? If you don't have those documents, right?
Yeah. So that's good. I started out my career working in the probate court. So I kind of got to see the different processes, the different, if you have a will, if you don't have a will, and it does take time to get started. So that's kind of one of the, I guess, the downsides of going through the probate process. It takes some time to get to that point where you have to go before the court, because one, you have to wait for a death certificate. So after someone passes away, you have to wait for a death certificate. That could take, varying amount of weeks. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's long. And then you have to go to an attorney to prepare the documents to go before the probate court. And then just to kind of get the ball rolling, you're looking at maybe you're 6 months down the line, when things could have happened a little bit sooner if you decided to do, some of the alternatives that we can talk about later, like a trust or beneficiary designations and things of the like. So, so those are kind of the process in terms of the time, but it's also more expensive generally to go through the probate process. So that's kind of one of the things from a planning perspective when I talk with clients is, hey, you can consider these other alternatives. We want to try to avoid the whole probate process if we can, to the extent we can, whether we look at, beneficiary designations on your life insurance, retirement accounts, because not everybody needs a trust, to be honest.
Yeah.
But there are some proactive things we can do to plan. And so, talking with your financial advisors, like checking in on your beneficiary designations, those are always good to do periodically, because things may change, right? You may help some kids out with education or buying a house. And so that might adjust how you want to divide your estate. So that may affect your beneficiary designations on, your varying accounts.
Yeah.
So those are kind of, generally the rule is to try to avoid the probate process. One, because it's costs more, and also it takes some time to kind of work towards the settlement of your entire estate.
Yeah, that's super good. And, thanks so much for providing that insight. And, I guess, you mentioned trust, and this might be a good time to kind of transition to that topic. And again, really just our goal is to be really just kind of educational, not give pointed direction, but, what might be a reason why someone would move from a trust, or from a will to a trust, instead. And, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe they do have both as well. So yeah, just kind of like talk through that, and maybe some of the, the good reasons why you would want to trust.
Yeah. So a trust, not every, some people do, some people, decide not to create a trust, but a trust basically is creating a relationship between you and your assets. And you're taking it from your individual name and putting into the name of your trust. And then your trust, one of the big, benefits of a trust is the flexibility that you have in your planning. It allows you a lot more options as you go into the planning process, and you can plan for a lot of the what ifs. What if this person's not surviving, and then how do I deal with different situations? And that's I think one of the key benefits of a trust is that it provides you that flexibility to adapt to and tailor it to your situation, as opposed to saying, hey, I want to divide these assets in these different ways, and then it goes out, and you don't have kind of an influence as to tailoring your plan to go along with your family situation. And so, a trust is designed can be designed in that way. It also avoids the probate process because it's no longer owned by you individually. Your assets are owned by your trust. And so that's where we have that distinction. But like Paul said, if you do have a trust, you'll likely also have a will. So you'll have both. And when you have a trust, the will becomes the plan B, I like to say. So plan A is your trust, plan B is your will. And it's called in, common terminology as a pour over will, like pour over coffee.
Yeah.
It takes things from your individual estate and directs it to your trust, which is, plan A, where we hope everything to be. And so that's kind of just, the simplified version of why you have both a trust and a will when you're creating a basic estate planning kind of set of documents. You'll have both documents just to cover in the event you forgot to put something into your trust. We'll be able to direct it back into your trust. And so the will then becomes plan B if you do have a trust. But when you start to look at your family situation, you kind of have to evaluate, okay, what are my goals? What am I trying to achieve? And kind of what is, how do I envision the administration to look like? If you have minor children, like myself, it, hits home close to home. When you start to think about, okay, if something were to happen to my wife and myself, who's going to start managing their money for them, right? They're young, even if they turn 18. When I was 18, I could not be trusted. I wasn't very good with money, right? Obviously, I didn't have Paul and Jason to, train me up. But, it's one of those things. Who's going to manage their money? Who's going to pay for their education, house them? All those types of things are considerations when you start to put together a trust. Do we want to delay when they get the money outright to when maybe after they graduate college, maybe they start work? Those are, ideas that we go through. And then kind of touching upon minor children, a will also takes care of that as well in terms of who is going to be the guardian of your minor children, right? That topic always comes up when young families are getting ready to go on an exciting vacation, right? Maybe the topic came up in my family where we're going to go on a family, Alaskan cruise. We're going to go, we're looking at the different excursions that you're going to go on. And so we're like, oh, if something were to happen to us if we're, riding, dog sleds in Alaska, who's going to take care of our 10-month-old daughter, right? And no, and a will is what it is the document, the key document that you can name who's going to take care of your children. If you leave that to chance, that could be, based upon statutory rules or cause confusion. And so that's kind of another aspect of a will that's important for families.
Yeah, that's so funny. That reminds me of when we went on our first trip without our oldest daughter. And we're just like, hey, what do we do? Okay, we better write something down,
Yeah.
Just going back to trust, it's really interesting because like you said, it's a lot more flexible. And, I can think of like, I was really young when this happened, but when my grandpa died, in the trust, like his son, my uncle, happened to get the benefits, but he had to wait till he was 50 to get those things to pay out. So it wasn't necessarily out of college. So I think the cool thing about trust, especially if you have desires and things to pass on, legacy type stuff, or even just simple stuff, you can get really specific and you can get really detailed. So I don't know, one thing that I wanted to touch on, and then Jason, if you wanted to kick in here, but like something that's really important, I feel like, is and something that maybe some people are concerned about is like who's going to help me, like who's my executor, who's going to be my trustee if something was that, who's going to make sure these things happen. So if you could talk about that. And I think the cool thing about having a trust is like it kind of spells it out, right? Like you can get as direct as you want, but like maybe who might that person be in some of that respects, and who might you want to consider? I don't know if you've ever talked to people about that.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because that's sometimes a difficult question to kind of, work through. Sometimes it's easy. They know, oh yeah, for sure, my brother, he's good with money. He's runs his own business or whatever it might be. But sometimes family members aren't necessarily the right choice. So I talk through families whether they want to name family members as their executor or their trustee to handle, the administration of their assets. And they, and some family members might have great skills to be able to do it. They're good with money, they're very responsible, they're diligent. Those are the qualities that you're looking at. Availability, some people who might have the great skill set might not have the availability to do it, right? Because we all have busy lives, working in Hawaii, raising families. Like it's a lot of work to be a trustee. So that's kind of another consideration, is who's going to be available and attentive to handling these affairs. Because one of the causes of disputes, especially when family members are selected as trustees, is, hey, they're taking too long. What I want my money now, right? After mom or dad dies, and we're working on administering the estate. That's kind of one of the biggest complaints. And so that's something to also consider as well. As alternatives, you can select non-family members, but they're maybe like friends. Maybe you have close friends that understand your values, understand what you wanted to do with your plan, and that you ultimately trust to carry out your wishes. That's another consideration. Some of the obvious ones is just naming your children, right? Say you have 3 children. Some people consider, hey, do I name them in birth order, right? Oldest, youngest, middle, in that particular order. That sometimes works out, but sometimes your youngest is the most responsible. And so, kind of thinking through those types of things and talking that out. Some people ask me, hey, I don't want to pick favorites. Why don't I name them all as co-trustees? Now, I always pause, because I assume that, I have to say, well, do your kids get along now? Right? Because sometimes you're like, we can see a train wreck coming. Right. And so that's kind of one of the things that I talk through with my clients is, well, what's the dynamic with your kids, right? Even if you just name one of them, they can work together to get this, to get the overall goal done. But you don't have to name them as representatives or co-trustees, because it might just slow down the process. And often with Hawaii families, right, there's some kids that live on the mainland, some kids live here, and that can just create a time lag on getting things done. And so that's another one of the considerations. Now, just a quick point, some of my clients select professional fiduciaries to serve in these situations. So you're like, if your family situation is like, hey, it's no good, no friend, no family member, there are local fiduciaries that serve as professional fiduciaries. Well, obviously, they take a fee from your estate, and it's based upon percentages of your, the value of your estate. So, that's another cost that comes out of, administering your estate, and that means less goes to your beneficiaries. But their professionalism is tremendously valuable in getting it done the right way, in an efficient way, and very transparent. Right. That's kind of another thing is providing information to beneficiaries. A professional fiduciary will know how to do their reporting, how to make sure they keep a clean accounting, so that there's no questions when it comes to making distributions and all those types of things. So that's just kind of a high level in terms of what your options are out there. And that's kind of that's where your estate planning attorney will kind of guide you through each one of those choices, pros, cons, to make that right decision for your family.
Yeah, so good. Jason, any thoughts, any other questions you want to add there about trust?
Yeah. Well, I just want to comment. I don't want to get too bogged down on the trust and make the whole episode about trust. But one thing me and Paul always talk about, Travis, is like with an IRA account is your IRA is the cup. And some people say I have an IRA, and we want to know what's inside. What are the investments that go inside? And I kind of look at the trust as the same way, where the trust is the wrapper of the cup. And it's a 2-part process. Correct me if I'm wrong, where you need to then fund the trust or put things inside of it, right? And I've heard, I don't know if it's common or uncommon, but sometimes families and households will set up this trust, but they'll never follow through with that second step, which is to fund the trust, right? You name the trust on different things.
Yeah, that's an excellent question because it's far too common that, we work with a family, we get it customized, all the provisions for how their family, envisions,
Mm,
and we don't fill the cup, like you said. We
mm,
don't move the house into the trust. We don't move their investments or their bank accounts. And then when they pass away, we're like, oh shoot, this is still hanging out there.
mm,
And you're exactly right. There, once you set up your, the vehicle, the bucket,
mhm,
it's your, getting those assets and moving them in there is that kind of part two, that kind of effort that you need to put into funding your trust. And great advisors kind of remind them like, hey, IRA needs to go there. You have a trust, and remind them about those types of things. And so it's always good to, I recommend to kind of, periodically kind of take a temperature check of like where you're at with your estate planning process. Because you may start something and then life gets busy and you put it on the side. And then you're like, shoot, like 5 years down the line, I didn't do that. It's such a common thing, and I'm guilty of it sometimes myself, right? Putting things on the side and then realizing, hey, I have to get back to that. And so taking that periodic check to just double check that everything's there is always a good practice. And then that'll also prompt your questions as, oh, what has changed over those couple of years, right? Has people gotten married, grandkids were born, maybe someone has passed away in the family, and it changes the dynamic of where you saw your plan going. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
that's a great question, Jason.
that's totally true. I mean, life is always moving forward, things change, relationships change, someone might pass away, someone might be born, right? And that all drives different things that change, which these documents are time stamped, but they are living, right? They're continuing to move forward with you. So updates are super important
Yep.
and necessary. Um, so let's just kind of keep moving on with a couple other like
Sure.
key documents, and just talking about what they do and what the value of those things are. So let's just talk a little bit about the Advanced Health Care Directive.
Mhm.
Why you'd
Yeah.
want to do that. Maybe like I don't know if there's like common like ages to think about this kind of stuff, or maybe what are some of the positives of why you would have it in getting something like this started.
Yeah. So Advanced Healthcare Directive is another way to say, it's a healthcare power of attorney. So basically it's, everyone should have it, no matter how healthy, how young, how old, how sick. You should get an advanced health care together. And that basically nominates who you want to make medical decisions in the event that you're not in the position to do so. And so that's, very critical, document to have, because you never know when you're going to be in that position where you're not able to speak for yourself. Who's going to understand, what your values are in terms of how you would want to be treated, right, in certain situations. So that's a very powerful document. Oftentimes, we really think about that document when we're going in for surgery and we have to go under the knife, right? The doctor says, "Hey, if anything were to happen, who's going to be that decision maker for you?" And so that the Advanced Healthcare Directive is that document, that key document that your doctors, your surgeons are always asking for. And so it's good to do it in advance because you never know what's going to happen. But there's typically two parts to an Advanced Healthcare Directive. So there's the first part, that's the power of attorney, who's going to make regular decisions for you. Then there's the second part that's called the living will. So that's what's often referred to as the living will. And it's basically how you want the situation to be handled at the end of life decision. So, if you're just living on life support, there's no hope for recovery. How do you want that situation to be handled? So at that point, you're not able to communicate. You're just living on breathing apparatuses, or, your heart is beating, based upon mechanically. And you can make a decision, okay, if there's no hope for recovery, do I want to remain on life support as long as reasonably possible? Or do I want to be removed off life support and then pass away naturally? People have different, in my experience, people have different views on this. And so it's kind of one of those things, sometimes personal experience influences that. Maybe they've seen a loved one pass away in a certain way, and that kind of influences how that decision is made. But it's a very sobering thought, in terms of thinking through, how do I want to that situation to be handled. And that gives you, the person who's creating the living will, that power to tell your family, this is what I want.
Exactly.
Right. And that's another vehicle to kind of avoid disputes among family members. I've seen the classic situation where there's, multiple children. They say, no, this is what mom would have wanted. No, this is what mom would have wanted. But that document will speak for you in that situation, that, hey, this document says this is what, mom or dad wanted. And, we're going to follow these instructions. And so that's kind of one of the benefits for that, for that type of, for this particular document, is not only getting this, who's going to make your decisions in normal situations, but also that end of life decision where emotions run high, circumstances are, pretty intense usually at that time, and is very emotional. And, having that decision made ahead of time kind of helps that process go a little bit more smoothly.
Yeah. And I love what you said there. It makes so much sense. I mean, like, these are situations, these are, money, relationships, and, end of life type of stuff, super emotional drivers, like, so many, like, I mean, we can see so many families that in these types of situations, end of life, deciding things for families, or, what's going to happen with, money and assets, like that has the potential to just separate and like just drive such wedges in families. And I think, if nothing else, like one of the things that I love about estate planning, and just making sure things are in order, is because you can kind of like set those things and say, hey, this is what I want to have happen. And like, that's why I feel like, so for me, like, I'm in my 30s, I have, an Advanced Health Care Directive, and, so it's like, at the end of life, I hope not to use it till that point in time, but like, hey, like,
Right.
here's, it's not like my kid's responsibility to decide, who's, I don't want dad to die. I don't want, I don't mom to die, hey, we've already helped them make those decisions, and it just helps, and again, can't eliminate the emotions completely, but it just helps lay out some groundwork and some just foundational, help to like kind of like move people through those things. And, with all of these documents, they're all super important. And Advanced Healthcare Directive is really no different, like you explained.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the more practical ones, I think, of your, you set up your estate plan, and the trust will kind of do its thing and move along in your lifespan. But the Advanced Healthcare Directive is probably the one that you're going to use maybe the most often, maybe next to your power of attorney. But that's kind of the most relevant one while you're alive. And like you said, it's going to set like a tone of peace, right? Because you have a plan, we understand who's going to make those decisions, come up, a situation that happens, and that'll, we understand what the plan is, right? I personally love when I know where I'm going, right, and who's going to be the leader on things. And so that's kind of just one element to take off the table of confusion, because that's oftentimes who's going to make that decision, right? Who do they trust? Even for the individual that's going through that process, is I have peace of mind knowing that, my son, my wife will be making those decisions, and I don't have to, be concerned about that.
Yeah, that's so good. Jason, thoughts? Anything to add there?
No, I got nothing. Definitely. I think that was a great job summing that up.
Yeah, it's perfect. So you actually brought up just, the power of attorney in general, right? And I know this one has a few moving parts, so just like in a sense, keeping it, as, concise and personal into certain extents, but, similar to the fiduciary thing that you talked about earlier, sometimes if you don't want to, select a family member or things like that, you can select others. But, yeah, Travis, tell us a little bit more about reasons to have a power of attorney, what that might look like, and circumstances that you've experienced.
Yeah, so power of attorney is the legal document that's going to designate who's going to be your agent for legal and financial decisions. And so, it's a powerful document while you're alive. And it can be effective either immediately. So the day that you sign it, that power that you give to that other person is valid. And so they can go and, conduct business as if they were in your shoes and sign on your behalf. And one of the practical reasons of allowing that to happen is that, say you're traveling, maybe, on the mainland, off island, and you needed something done here in Hawaii, you can have your power of attorney sign on your behalf. You may still have your capacity, but that power of attorney can be used to close, real estate transactions or communicate with the banking official or your investment advisor. Some people choose, maybe if they're, they don't have close family members that they selected, maybe they selected a friend as their power of attorney, but they're not really ready to give that power over to their friend as power, as their power of attorney. They can have it become effective at a future date, which is typically when they've been deemed incapacitated, and then their power comes into being. And so that's kind of one of the, that's one of the options that someone has available to them, is that only when it's necessary and needed, when I can no longer make those decisions, then my fiduciary, my nominated person can start to act. And in a power of attorney, you can kind of select what types of powers you give to them. Some people give very broad powers. Some people can be very specific as to what kind of limited powers they're able to, if they're granted. And so it's a very powerful tool to be able to have someone act on your behalf if, you're not able to. So the healthcare power of attorney and the financial power of attorney are kind of companions, but they fulfill different roles. Yeah. And they can be different people. So you might have someone that can make your medical decisions and that that you trust in that way. But then you can name someone your financial power of attorney that handles those types of things. Typically, it's the same person you nominate as your trustee because they kind of fulfill the same type of role. And when you do have a trust, your power of attorney typically works to move things into your trust. And so that's kind of one of the helpful, useful tools to use your power of attorney.
Yeah. And I feel like this one I mean, all of them are super important, I would say, but this one, like, especially with, aging parents, cognitive issues and things like that, like, you would think something simple like, oh, being able to go write a check to pay the utility bill or something like that would be super easy. But if there's a cognitive issue and that person can't sign on their behalf, like, or there's some kind of issue, then, having this power of attorney, it becomes, essential, effectively, or it just becomes such a bear to just do something that would seem so simple like that.
Yeah, you're totally right. Especially in Hawaii, there's multi-generational living, kids are helping grandparents, grandkids are helping, their grandparents. And as they get older, they can't go down to the bank, and communicate with their banker, communicate with their investment advisor. So sometimes they need to send their power of attorney to kind of get these things done for them. And that's, another one of the uses, even, paying their bills and managing their finances. One of the sad things is, there's a rise in elder, financial crimes, right? Sure. People taking advantage of people. There's so many different ways that this can happen. And, a power of attorney can kind of be kind of an overseer and kind of intervene at a appropriate time to kind of prevent kind of financial abuse. And so that's another, one of the benefits of kind of having that key person, in your corner to be able to look out for you.
Yeah, that's so good. Just, thinking about, power of attorneys in general, Jason, quick thoughts before we move on.
No, I like what you're talking about, Travis, about how you can dial it in. I think some people think it's like this blanket, powers for everything, right? I like that you brought that up.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be blanket, right? I mean, it can be like, hey, I want it to just be as flexible as possible. I think a majority of people prefer it that way. Right. But yeah, you could dial it in. There's also different types of power of attorney. There's special power of attorney. So I worked with families that, hey, they're going to go on a trip, but they're going to grant power of attorney for a limited period of time. And so, yeah, you can, there's certain different options they have available. And another thing, so when you see the title of your document say durable power of attorney, that durable word basically means that if you become incapacitated, this power of attorney will survive that. So you could lose, you lose your cognitive ability to use, manage your finances. And then it will, your agent still will be able to act on your behalf. So that's, kind of like what Paul had said in terms of what that usefulness is.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, I love that. And like, you think of like, I can't think of anything specific in a situation, but you think of like, these crazy stories of, these celebrities that, their agents or somebody lost a bunch of money for them. And like, they have these types of things, and, there's fear, or there's like, I'm not sure, like, is it really something I need to do? And, or there's mistakes that are made along the way. Right. So, just kind of, maybe just like, maybe in your experience, and obviously we're not going to talk about any like specific client names and things like that, but maybe in your experience, what are some of maybe the more common mistakes when you think about just estate planning in general? And obviously not doing an estate plan is the biggest mistake we can make, but, just thinking about that might be like, we talked a little bit about not funding a trust already, but, what are some common mistakes that you see families make?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is not kind of following through and funding their trust. I think that's kind of a top of mind type of thing. But then also kind of selecting who your fiduciaries are, and kind of even evaluating if it's still appropriate. Because far too often, sometimes the person you trusted, 15, 20 years ago, so, may not be the same person. Values have changed, the perspective has changed, and then someone loses capacity, and that really isn't the right fit for them, right? And it may not be anything bad in terms of mismanagement of money, but it's just not the right fit. And that's where the dynamics of the family can kind of get upset, because it's not the right person. And if they would have maybe taken action a little bit earlier, we could have made that adjustment or change. So I've seen that happen, is where, family turmoil has happened in the family, but no one got the individual didn't get around to making a change. And then that issue just festered over time. And then when the need arose, it just, it's a built up of, amount of angst amongst the family that, that was unnecessary. We could have made a change earlier. So,
yeah. And to me, like, one of the things that I feel like is such an important role is, in a sense, yes, it's great to have these documents, but I think expressing some of these things beforehand are super important too, like, so I always tell, like, even from like my own parents and my family, I'm like, we need to talk about these things while you guys are living, so we can actually understand why we're doing these things, so these relationships don't get separated, so these my siblings don't get frustrated. So I feel like, I know this is just my thought, like, it's sometimes, we have these great intentions and we set these things up for success, but we don't actually express those values and express those things before death, right? So in some of these cases, it's like, I did not expect this to happen. I thought it was going to be different. And just because that was their assumption, right? It was never expressed. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's always important to talk about these things. It's always important to update these things, because, it's very common to see, beneficiaries named and beneficiaries need to be changed, right? But
and then on that, Paul, sorry to jump in here. So if you do have to make a change, the amendment is, you don't need to redo your whole trust or estate plan. You just amend it, right? Which isn't, I think maybe some of our listeners might think you got to redo the whole set of documents and all, but amendment is not as involved, right, Travis?
Yeah, so if it's a simple amendment, maybe you're just changing, who your trustees are. Maybe you got to change up the order, or change just the individuals in general. Yeah, you could just amend just that paragraph, or maybe even the distribution paragraph. You can make a very discreet short amendment. People sometimes do many amendments over time, because a lot of things have changed, dynamics change, financial situations change. But yeah, you don't necessarily always have to completely redo your trust. And another thing that that people that question that always comes up is that when you start a trust, the date relates back to when you first started your trust. So say you started it in 1995, well, that date will always be the date of your trust, but each amendment will have its own date that relates back to that original date.
Okay.
And so that's kind of, people kind of get confused about that. So that's just kind of a clarifying thing if somebody already has a trust. But you're correct, like, you can just make simple amendments over time, as your needs change. And yeah, you don't have to kind of invest kind of the whole shebang all over again, or like redoing it all over. So
yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, and another thing that might change is the laws, like tax laws change.
Right.
Back in the 90s, there, the exemption from inheritance tax or estate tax was fairly low, compared to it is today.
Right.
Back in just before, like, when in the 90s, it was the exemption amount before you have to start paying estate tax was $600,000. And so, as we all know, owning just one home in Hawaii will kind of set you over that limit.
Yeah.
And so people were very concerned about the estate tax at that point in time. That amount has gone up significantly. So we're not doing a lot of tax planning. Just for the listener's perspective, in 2023, the federal exemptions at well over $11 million. So each individual can pass up to $11 million tax-free, without consequence, without any taxes. And so most people aren't concerned about estate taxes at this point. And now we're strategizing for how do we maximize the value to your beneficiaries.
Right. No, that's such a good point. I mean, I know like, those numbers always change, even with like retirement savings and all those things, it always changes. And, for most of our listeners, $11 million is quite a bit of money. But you never know. And it's always still important to have that person or have these things in order. So, obviously you're an estate planning attorney here in Hawaii. So, as you think about like, why would someone or how would someone go about choosing to work with an attorney? I mean, working with any professional, right? You're going to want to like make sure you have some alignment, but what would you think would be a great thing to look for in an estate planning attorney like yourself?
Yeah. And sorry, and I would just add in there, Travis, correct me if I'm wrong, is there different sort of niches or different types of estate planning attorneys as far as specializations maybe that our listeners should know about?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So I think to answer the first question in terms of selecting an estate planning attorney, I think it really comes down to the fit and personality, right? Working with someone that you're comfortable sharing, your life, your situation with, right? They're going to want to know what you own, how you own it, someone that you feel comfortable kind of disclosing that information, but also someone who focuses in the area of estate planning. I think that's important to be able to navigate the different issues that your family may have, because then they'll be exposed to many different situations and how there's maybe solutions to the problem that you may be having. And so that's kind of another thing, is kind of focus on a planner who focuses in the area of estate planning. We have a very excellent small community here in Hawaii. And so there's many different planners out there, all different kind of ranges of experiences, personalities. I was previously the chair of the probate and estate planning section of the bar. And so I got to interact with a lot of different professionals. So we have a lot of great professionals here. And so that's kind of one of the things, is kind of getting an assessment of who you feel comfortable with. Just like your advisor, right? Financial advisor, like, do you feel comfortable with that person? And then kind of working with that person to develop that plan. And then to your point about the different niches, some practitioners focus on, general estate planning. Some people focus on high net worth planning, right? They're planning for how do you save taxes? How do you maximize, navigate the tax code in a beneficial way? There's people who focus on special needs planning. And so that's kind of another specialty, right? If you have loved ones, like whether it's children or other loved ones you want to set up a trust for, there's certain provisions that have to be included to be able to maximize governmental benefits to that individual. And so, that's a specialty area. There's other people who specialize in Medicaid planning, in terms of how do we navigate qualifying for Medicaid, right? That's something that has to be planned out years in advance. And so there's professionals who, that's their primary focus. So when you kind of look at, different websites, right? We do research, looking at their websites, you can see what services they offer and kind of maybe what their specialty is. But I think the best recommendations are, come through word of mouth, right? You'll have a friend who worked with someone, can testify, hey, this person was a great person to work with. I think that's kind of the process and the way things work here in Hawaii, right? I got a guy, right? And I think that's generally how people, one, find me, and how people find, the professionals that they're working with is through word of mouth, right? So asking family, friends, kind of who they've worked with, did they have a positive experience, negative experience, whatever it might be. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to hiring any professional, right, it's always word of mouth is super, like, coconut wireless, they say, right? So it's like, it's all about who you know, and definitely understanding like you're looking for a fit that fits you well. And, for this particular case, just because someone's an attorney, right, doesn't make them be able to understand all these things. Because, my mom works for a law office, but they do medical malpractice, not estate planning. So I'm not going to go to her boss just because she's, someone we know, right? So it's understanding like, and there are different types of attorneys out there, just for common information there.
Yeah, and usually, visiting an attorney's office kind of like gives people anxiety, right? They're like, oh my gosh, like I never thought I would need an attorney, right? But hopefully, we like to, us in the estate planning community, hopefully it's a positive experience with an attorney. My experience is like, hey, I get the privilege of being a part of this process with a family. And at the end of it, they feel better about the interaction as opposed to, other attorneys you have to interact with. It's usually a difficult process. No one's ever happy at the end. And so that's what I love about, estate planning, working with families is that, at the end, everyone's feeling good about having accomplished this, this major milestone and, in getting this done. So.
No, that's so true. That's actually really true. I mean, most of the reason people think like, oh, I need to hire an attorney to go sue somebody, right? And that's, or, to go get a divorce. Yeah, that's not what we're doing here. We're here to set things up. We're here to get your family, get your ducks in a row, if you will. It's really just, it's meant to be purposeful to help really just articulate and illustrate what you want to have happen, so that when those things happen, or when something happens to you, these things are taken care of. We're taking the guesswork out of it. Like, what did mom want to do? So yeah, so good. So good. So, obviously there's varying professionals out there. There's varying costs associated with this. Maybe dispel some of those concerns. You don't got to share what you charge, but like, what are some ranges, or what are some thought process of people that people can have on some sort of costs associated with getting legal support in these documents, and getting not just like the documents, because that's not the only thing. It's actually getting the professional that's going to walk you through each of these things. So like, I want to stress that enough. Like, it's not just, oh, this is so simple, let's just go get this simple document. No, it's actually like these professionals guide and help maybe open up doors that you didn't even realize were available. So anyway, just kind of prefacing by that, like, Travis, what is a range, or what does it look like to get an assistance in something like this in estate documents?
Yeah, so it definitely can range. There's different professionals that design, have different fee structures. I would say most estate planning attorneys can do kind of a flat fee if it's they can anticipate kind of the issues that are coming that you have. Generally, they can offer a flat fee for you. Some people charge by the hour, where it's kind of unknown in terms of how much time is spent. But I would say most attorneys in this area charge a flat fee, so you know exactly how much it's going to cost upfront. What are the documents you're going to get? And so I think the range probably is going to be on from from the lower end, probably $2,500 up to maybe like 5,000, or it could be a little bit more, just depending on the complexities that your situation might have. And it can range from a simple will plan where you have a will, powers of attorney, those basic set of documents, all the way up to having wife has a trust, husband has a trust, and then you have all the set of documents. There's also deeds that are involved in terms of funding your trust with your real property that you may have. And so those are kind of the things that commonly the attorney will handle. When you go out and do the, changing your investments and things like that, that's where you work with your advisors. But yeah, that's in terms of the, the different ranges. I know it's tempting, right? Even my college classmate called me up from California. Is like, hey, can I use LegalZoom to do my will? And I've actually seen a situation where someone went and did LegalZoom, and hey, the document was legally binding, legally valid. However, you're answering questions along the way, right? And the questions are only as good as you know how to put them in. And like Paul had said, right, a live person has experiences, understands kind of dynamics in families, and they'll bring out your options that you may not even have thought of. And so that's kind of one of the things that I encourage folks is like, yes, it may be more of an investment to work with an estate planning attorney, but they'll be able to give you your option, right? And you can say, hey, I got this problem, or this is a unique situation in part of my family, and then they can help you navigate through that and give you your options. And then ultimately you decide. I've seen LegalZoom, hey, it works, it's low cost, but there's just, things that may not get communicated where it needs to be. And so that's just kind of the caution there. But yeah, those are kind of the ranges and price ranges, and how you would go ahead select someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, in a lot of things you get what you pay for, right? Like, so I mean, I can't, express enough, like, working with working with a live person, right?
Yeah.
Or a really good attorney. It might have a cost, but that, like you said, Travis, it's an investment. It doesn't just achieve what you want to achieve. It gives a significant, peace and like understanding. Okay, like if something was to happen to me, like this is meant to be there.
Yeah, and I think the other benefit of working with, an estate planning attorney experienced in this area is who may be there to execute this plan, right? So I'm about to turn 40 soon, right? I have a lot of clients, in the later stages of life that are, choosing to work with me because, I'll more than likely will be here to help their kids, grandkids transition this plan into that next phase, into the execution of their plan. And so that's kind of another consideration is having that comfort of mind, like knowing, hey, I can call this person if this situation comes up, they can help me navigate it, maybe put my mind at ease, like, hey, we got this, as part of your plan. Because often, I'll explain it one day, right? It's such a complex document. They'll be like, hey, I just want to double check, is this okay? And be like, yeah, we got you covered. Your plan's designed for that. And then that kind of say, okay, I'm good. And then they'll be able to do that. Sometimes you can't do that with these online platforms.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah. Sorry to interject. I love that because in the age of YouTube where we learn to do everything ourselves, I think a lot of us lose track of the value of a professional, right? And a lot of times we think we know the question that's being asked, but then when somebody provides some more context, it completely changes our answer. I just love that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, so much discussion in, I'm sure in your guys' field and in the legal field about, AI, right? What is that going to do to our industry? But I think, to be honest, like working with local families, right? There's so many different dynamics that we have here in Hawaii. I don't think you can replicate that, right? It just takes experience, understanding, hey, these are the way that the dynamics in a local Hawaii family looks like, right? This is what multi-generational living looks like. This is how you navigate these issues and different personalities, right? And so that's kind of the thing. Yeah, like you said, a professional, I don't think is, you can't replace that knowledge and experience.
Sure.
That's super true. I mean, in any profession, right? You want to make sure you're working with people that that you can trust, that you can really, move forward with in these things. But, Travis, just, super thankful for your time. We just really appreciate you giving your wealth of knowledge on just, the basics of what it would look like to just get that estate planning process started, with a will, with a trust, with all these great different documents that will just help us through life and through those events. If ever necessary, these things are there and in place. And, if I can just encourage our listeners, like, if you don't have any of these things in place, just, think about it, maybe talk to your spouse or maybe talk to your parents about like, hey, what are some things? I feel like open communication about these types of things is a good thing, right? Like, I think sometimes, especially local culture, it's like, there's a little bit of hesitancy. There's a little bit of like fear, or like, I don't want people to really, they hold it real close to the chest. Right. But it's like, maybe if you can have a little bit more open, maybe like the reason you would want an attorney is to maybe be an intermediary for some of these things, to help maybe talking with maybe a difficult relationship or things like that. But anyway, with that being said, just, Travis, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Travis.
Thanks for adding so much value to our listeners. Thank you for just doing all that you do. And we're just super excited to have you on, and, super excited to have you as a friend. So
awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Any last remarks, Jason? Any last thoughts?
No, that's it. Thanks again, Travis, Agustin Hawaii Law. And I think that wraps us up for this episode.
Perfect.
Thank you, guys. Aloha.
All right. Take care.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions expressed by Jason Katita, Paul McWilliams, and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by Toba Financial or Inspire Advisors. For Jason Katita, investment advisory services are offered through Toba Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration. And for Paul McWilliams, investment advisory services are offered through Inspire Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC.